and then we'll start going through the applied section. Hi, Joey.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you. And the reason is chapters 7 and 8, they deal a lot with topics like different levels of tshuva, of atonement, and also different levels of how the soul is cleansed after being in a life. Not so much because that's the focus of the Tanya, but more to give us a map of the cosmos. We've gotten a map of what's happening inside our soul. I perhaps much more detailed than when we started learning. We each have a new perspective on looking at how my soul is flowing through my body. And 7 and 8 are giving us a detailed map of the cosmos and of the productive and counterproductive sides. But I'm not sure that level of detail is necessary for what we're looking at right now. So I want to kind of give the big picture in one chunk, and that'll complete the information section. We'll start to move on to the next few chapters where the Alter Rebbe comes back to the conversation at the beginning, where he asked us a number of questions about a tzaddik and a rasha and a beinoni, right? A other-centered, self-centered, and neutral person, but he never really defined them. So he comes back and first he talks about how these two souls will interact within us, in our heart and in our mind. There's a duality there. He looks at it more clearly now that we have our information. And then he goes on to define a tzaddik, define a rasha, and finally define a beinoni, which is the focus of the book. So don't be surprised if it took 10 or 12 or more chapters. That's typical of this type of text. And it's very difficult to just explain it. You have to kind of go somewhere else and then come back with a new perspective. And we find spiritually a much more dynamic way of explaining something like this than just laying it out. So to get us up to speed, we've looked at chapter 1 where we learned about the oath to try and be a tzaddik, but at least don't be a rasha and try and be a tzaddik. And if the whole world says you're a tzaddik, think of yourself like a rasha. We also learned about tzaddik, rasha, and beinoni, and we learned about our two souls, that we have two souls, the first of which is this self-centered soul. Like a baby takes care of itself, right? Our whole life long, that's always present flowing, and it's what gives us our physical energy, in fact. Chapter 2, we learned about the second soul, which that other-centered soul is really a piece of God actually within us. Third chapter, we learned about the attributes of the divine soul, right? 3 intellectual, 7 emotional and behavioral. The intellectual attributes should be the parents of the emotional attributes, and it should flow that way. And also that the garments, chapter 4, we learned about the garments of the divine soul, thought, speech, and action, which on the one hand are external. That's just how my soul behaves. It's not what my soul is. My thoughts are not what my soul is, right? Chochmah, Biyah, Daat, Nefesh, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, those are the identity of the soul. Any particular thought that's running through my mind, that is a garment the soul is put on. But even though it is external, it has the ability to elevate my soul above its own source, right? Because the garments of the divine soul are divine intellect, Chochmah v'Tzilus, which is really still in a state of oneness with Ein Sof. And so even though it looks like we're just learning some Hebrew words from a book, our soul is actually right now being elevated upwards. And same thing with mitzvahs. If I put a coin in a charity box, my physical being just sees some physical stuff, put it going into a box. However, that is actually ratzon of Atzilus. It's divine will, still one with Ein Sof. And so again, my garments are able to elevate me to a space much, much higher than the attributes of my soul, my own meditations, my own attempts. That brings us to chapter 5, where we looked in chapter 4 at the garments of the soul. Chapter 5, we look at the food of the soul, which is Torah study. And we looked at the beautiful oneness we experience. And it's a lovely image to have even now, that as our minds are trying to grasp these subjects, the subject is also grasping our mind. Right? So, whereas with the, thanks, it's a little warm in here. With the physical, we're being embraced by godliness, as it were. But with learning Torah, we're experiencing both an inner and an outer oneness. from inside and from outside. So it's a oneness that's quite unique. And in fact, we take it in, we ingest it. When you learn some Torah insight or some Jewish insight, now it changes in a subtle way how you look at everything else you will ever learn. It's now ingested. So we're taking this Chokhmah V'Tzilus and we're actually able to internalize it. Right? An angel or a soul goes crazy hearing about this. What? You Chokhmah V'Tzilus, you're taking it inside. It's so bright we can't get within a parsec of it. And all they're seeing is the light of it. We're taking the actual Chokhmah itself and we're ingesting it. So although for us it seems, I could take it or leave it, it's a mundane activity perhaps, for a soul or for an angel, what we're doing here is extraordinary. That's why we're told the soul waits a millennia or more to come down into a body to be able to have this perspective, to have this sense of unity. That gets us to chapter 6, where we looked at now the animal soul. So that's my first soul, my self-centered soul, and everything is mirroring everything else. Right? So we said, just like the divine soul, the animal soul has 10 attributes, although in this case, the emotional attributes are running the household. They're telling the parents what to do, and the parents are just rationalizing, well, my kids like sugar, so I give them sugar so they'll be happy, right? Not a very good parenting, right? Oh, my kids wanted to have, the latest chainsaw to play with in the backyard, so I bought them a few and I gave them, right? Not very good parenting, right? The children should not be running the show. Same thing emotionally. Just because my nefesh b'amit says, I want chocolate cake every morning, or I want to make twice what I'm making now, or whatever, it doesn't mean that my intellect needs to rationalize that, right? It may or may not be a worthwhile endeavor, but the intellect should be judging it on its merits, not simply because it popped up into my heart. And that's how nefesh b'amit works. The bulk of nefesh b'amit is the midot, is the emotional attributes. The intellect is simply there, as we said, first of all, to perceive a thing that the emotions may want, because emotions on their own, they can't, until they understand something, they don't know what to want, right? So my intellect is there to look at the sports car, and then my emotions go, whoa, sports car. And then nefesh b'amit says, okay, intellect, tell me, how can I get it without getting in trouble? And how can I rationalize wanting it and getting it and still feel good about myself? And that's the extent of how the intellect works for nefesh b'amit. Very, very clever, but it's being driven by the emotional body of nefesh b'amit. And now the end of chapter 6 and 7 and 8 that I want to look at today starts to look at how this projects into the world around us. And we looked at the idea of sitra achra, the other side, and how it distinguishes itself from the klipot, which are the shells. And this is going to be helpful for today. So for sitra achra, the other side, there's only holiness and other than holiness. And once you're other than holiness, you're just other than holiness. It makes no difference, right? You're either recognize that there's only one being, that there's only one infinite light, and you're completely nullified to that light, like a ray of light within the sun, or like the flame of a candle within the ball of the sun. There's no flame, there's no ray, there's only sun. And that's holiness. That's all it is. Once you have your own identity, once that ray leaves the sun and says, I'm a ray, I exist, I'm not from a source, right? Then suddenly, now you're not holiness anymore, you're the other side, you're sitra achra. Is that thing completely negative? Is it just overtly destructive? Is it just have a sense of self that's subtle? Makes no difference. It's left the sense of being nullified to Ein Sof, so it's other, it's the sitra achra. But now in life, we have a little more detailed view of things. And when we talk about the klipa, when we talk about the shell or the husk that reality presents itself as, right? We mainly look and see physical stuff and physical bodies and physical phenomena. We think physical thoughts even in our brain. We don't get back to the intellect so often. We notice the thoughts and not the intellect, right? We feel physical emotions. We don't necessarily notice the source of those emotions. In every phenomena, we mainly are seeing klipa. And with klipa, there actually are levels. It's not like sitra achra, which is just your godliness or your other. With sitra achra, with klipa, there's two main categories again. One of them we learned about is the klipa noga, which means the luminescent klipa, it means the translucent klipa, it means the sort of shining klipa, it's got a radiance about it. There's some light in there. It's sort of mixed in, it's sort of buried, it's sort of, like 0.1% just rattling around there, but you look at it and you're like, it's a shell, but I think there's some light in there. And then below that, there's 3 more layers, which we consider one category, and we call them the 3 impure klipot, but we just call them the most physical. They're the most coarse. They actually don't have, in our soul pathway, any light that we can process. Right? They do have light. We'll get to perhaps today what that light is, but it's not a light that you can process in the Jewish soul path. So those 3 klipot, the 3 impure klipot, they're not like the peel of a grape, which you kind of see through and you see there's seeds in there and there's fruit in there and it's very thin. You can kind of get a sense of what's inside from looking at a grape. They're more like the shell of a coconut. Right? And if I'd never met a coconut and I saw this big brown thing sitting in a tree, I might think it was just wood all the way through or whatever it is, fiber all the way through. Right? I have no way of knowing that if I can really smash through it, there's this beautiful white flesh and there's tasty milk and all kinds of delightful things to eat. From looking at it, you could never tell. And even without a tool, I'm not sure I have my body could even get through it. I don't want to go banging my head against it. There's no way for a human to open a coconut without the proper tools, right? It's inaccessible to us. That's the difference between klipa noga and the 3 impure klipot. Now, it plays out inside in that all of my nefesh b'amit, all chokhmah of nefesh b'amit and chesed of nefesh b'amit, all of its attributes, its identity, stems, we heard, from klipa noga, from this luminescent klipa. Right? We learned that in chapter 6. And that is, it is what it is. It has some light in it. However, when the garments of the animal soul start acting, so when I start talking with the animal soul, thinking, acting with the animal soul, now that reaches down to the 3 impure klipot. Right? So inside, my animal soul itself is neutral. It's full of power. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's only when it expresses and takes control of my thought, speech, and action that it actually reaches down to below its source and can actually drag me down. And that's that conversation I had where I lost my temper and I started calling someone names, right? And that's that late night binge where I was emotional eating and just ate whatever for my own comfort. And that's that $200 that I really owed someone, but they forgot and I didn't pay them. Whatever it is, right? Once it starts expressing in subtle or in really dramatic ways, that's the 3 impure klipot within us. Now, what about the wider world, as in chapters 7 and 8? In this case, the world is divided also into klipas noga and 3 impure klipot. And the vast, vast majority of what's in the world is klipas noga. And holiness, by the way. There's a very, very small amount of holiness. As we said, the Torahs that are in our sanctuary, any sanctuary, you open them up, somehow inside we know, I have to treat this with reverence, right? This is nullified to the Ein Sof. It's physical matter, yes, but it's just there to serve our tradition, to teach me Torah. That's holiness. Right? The Kiddush cup that I've used and that I got from my parents and from their parents that I use on Shabbat to make a Kiddush, it's in the physical world, but it's there just to celebrate Shabbat. That's holiness. Right? It's still physical, but we call that holiness because it's nullified. It's serving our tradition. What's klipa noga? That's the vast majority of things that our tradition says, fine, it's allowed. Right? The trees outside, fine. Chop them down, reasonably. Do something with them productively. If they're completely neutral, you're allowed, right? The fish in the sea that we can eat with scales, most of what we find. With animals, it's different. With animals, it's mainly 3 impure klipot, but many animals. The majority of the world, and especially the physical world, the inanimate world and plant world, it's all klipas noga. It's all there for us to use, and it's neutral. It's up to us whether it's going to be elevated or be degraded. And then there's 3 impure klipot, which our tradition has them different from the other 70 soul pathways, right? If you're not Jewish, then eating a plate of lobster is perfectly fine from a Jewish perspective. No concern with that. But for a Jewish soul path, there are elements of the world that are 3 impure klipot, and it means that we actually can't, they're not dynamic for us. We can't extract any light from them, right? So were I to steal money from someone to try and give it to charity, I may think I'm doing a mitzvah, and I may have all the wonderful intentions in the world, and I may be doing it with a great sense of spiritual purpose, and I may actually be helping on this side, and I may have stolen it from someone who didn't need it, didn't notice it, right? So what's the harm, right? Here I am, I'm Robin Hood. But with 3 impure klipot, spiritually, Robin Hood doesn't work. If I stole that money, now for me, it's impure klipot, and now the light that may have been in there, it's not accessible to me. And I can give it 1,000 times to tzedakah. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to elevate it. And the same goes with any material thing, or even anything that has to do with our garments. We're going to look at some of the texts, and we'll look at eating as well as speaking. And any of the garments of the animal soul, they wind up dealing with either klipas noga or 3 impure klipot, depending on what's driving them. Well, if it's a garment of the animal soul, it's 3 impure klipot. But you'll see how it works in with the dynamic of the soul that we looked at. So that's just a quick introduction to the little pieces we're going to look at today. Any questions about that, about the difference between klipas noga and 3 impure klipot? Good. So we're just going to touch page 116, which is Lessons in Tanya, chapter 7, starting at the top. V'hi b'chinat mimutzaat bein 3 klipot hatmeot legamrei uvein b'chinat umadrigat hakadusha.
Now, klipat noga is an intermediate category between the 3 completely unclean klipot and the category in order of sanctity.
Right, and notice it's not. He doesn't say it's an intermediary. He doesn't say it's a category that's in between holiness and impure klipot. He says it's an intermediate category between the 3 unclean klipot and the category of sanctity, right? So it's not in the category of sanctity at all. It's in the category of klipot, and it's not an intermediary between holiness and klipa. It's just an intermediate category within the klipa. So klipas noga is still klipa. From the point of view of holiness, it's not in the category of holiness. It's left that. The difference between klipas noga and the impure klipot has to do with dynamics of how we interact with it, which we'll get to. V'lachen, is it hard to hear with the air on? Is that we're good?
Warm, but
Yeah, maybe. I think we could turn that air off if I don't think it's going to get too cold in here. Thank you, Adam. ולכן פעמים שהיא נכללת ב3 קליפות הטמאות, כמו שכתוב בעץ חיים שער מ"ט ריש פרק ד' בשם הזוהר, ופעמים שהיא נכללת ועולה בבחינת ומדרגת הקדושה.
Hence it is sometimes absorbed within the 3 unclean klipot, as explained in Eitz Chaim, portal 49, beginning of chapter 4, citing the Zohar. And at other times, it is absorbed in and elevated to the category and level of sanctity.
Right, so this is the majority of stuff in the world, right? What are our houses made of? Klipas noga. What are our cars made of? Klipas noga. What are books made of? Klipas noga, right? It's the majority of what we encounter in the world. And in the world, it's completely neutral. No, it's not nullified to holiness, so it's not in the category of holiness. It's sitra achras, the other side. But it's not evil, it's not counterproductive, it's just neutral. It's waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for you and for me. Yeah?
Do we elevate it by blessing it?
Sometimes it involves
like we put a mezuzah on our house, are we elevating it to a level of sanctity? Or
sometimes it involves a blessing, but not necessarily. And not necessarily, if I've said a blessing, doesn't mean I'm elevating it. That's the trick. Okay, halachically, a blessing, I could say a blessing over food, and I could eat a kosher meal, and I could not break any halacha, and I could not be elevating it, because it's different, right? This is not about halachic rules and what's permissible. This is actually about spiritual dynamics, right? And so a person having a perfectly kosher Jewish, experience after a Temple Israel service with their family may be actually doing the same thing as somebody going to McDonald's on Shabbat, to have a bacon cheeseburger because it tastes good, right? Spiritually, there's not necessarily a distinction. It has to do with something else. But yes, once we encounter something from Klipas Noga, now we're in a relationship with it, and now it's up to us what happens to it. And it does not stay neutral once it's encountered me. It can't. Once it's encountered me, now it's either going to go up to its source, so the spark will rise up again to holiness, and that is tikkun olam. That is the spiritual definition of tikkun olam, is not simply social justice and helping communities become better and teaching people about right and wrong. Tikkun olam spiritually is a dynamic flow where a spark within a physical object or a physical phenomenon now returns to its spiritual source. Yeah? It's a big wow. And these sparks that I'm encountering, they're my sparks. It's not like when I'm eating this meal or when I move into this house, somebody else might have elevated that spark, but it came across me, so now I get to work with it, and yay, I moved it up. That spark, Zohar says, had my name on it. It's my share of the world. No one else can do my work for me, right? So once I've encountered it, not only is it now going to go up or down, but it's up to me, and no one else can actually help me in that sense directly. No one else can do my work for me, and no one else could have. We each have a share in the world, and our soul came down to have those encounters and to elevate those sparks. Yeah. So it either goes up, back to its source, or unfortunately, if I'm mindless or self-centered, if I'm using nefesh bamit, and the garments of nefesh bamit get a hold of it, now it's not going to stay neutral. Now it's going to be, as we said, the garments of nefesh bamit, they go down to 3 impure klipot, and so does that spark. So what was once a neutral piece of work on my desk to do, kanter smolash, eat this meal with your nefesh elokit for a good reason and do stuff good with it, and boom, it goes up. Now it becomes a problem. Now I'm getting emails, oh, that meal, it's down in the klipot, it's complaining and it wants to come back. You're going to have to figure it out this life or another life. Right now I've got sirens going off, but it's not going to stay just neutral on my desk. It's not a to-do anymore. Now it's either a beautiful piece of the world that I've brought back to its source, or it's something that now I'm responsible for driving it deeper into the physical aspect of reality. So we have a responsibility. It's actually a relationship.
It's a lot of weight on your shoulders.
It is, yeah. You want to approach it with joy, though. Joy is a big secret. But it may sound far out to us as, modern progressive Jews, but if we actually look at what physics has been telling us, it's not so far from what physics says, right? Kabbalah says everything physical you encounter is actually being created by a spark of godliness, of energy, that is projecting into time and space constantly. Quantum mechanics says, look deep enough into something, and all that's there is emptiness and energy. That's all it is. It's coming out of nothing and out of energy. Physical matter is nothing but energy. Projecting it all the time, and most of it is just empty space. It's nothingness. Right? So, same thing. And amazingly, the Tanya says, once I encounter something, once I am in its domain, once I relate to something, once I've observed something and it's part of my world, it doesn't stay as it is. It doesn't stay neutral. Because I've observed it and now I'm in a relationship with it, it's either going to go up to holiness or it's going to drop down to the klipa. It can no longer stay in its state. I can't just walk in and encounter something and interact with it and have it stay as it is. And what does quantum mechanics say? Okay, we got these particles, and they're sort of like waves and sort of like particles. And you know what? If we look at them, they start to behave like waves, and if we don't look at them, they remain as particles. Even after the fact, if you've seen these crazy slit experiments, they have these particles that are sometimes particles, sometimes waves, and when they measure how they bounced off after they've gone through the slit, because I'm measuring them here afterwards, it changes how they go through the slit, whether it's a wave or a particle. And they see it. They turn the measuring machine off, and suddenly, poof, it's now a particle. They turn it on, poof, it becomes a wave before it was measured. So in the past, it can actually change it. Physics is moving into wild territory we have not yet integrated it. Right? Compared to that, we're still living on a flat Earth. Right? We haven't recognized that we're dealing just with energy, and that when we interact with the energy, we alter it. But that's what physics is saying, right? Our brightest scientists say that's reality. Explain it or don't explain it. So same thing here. When I encounter something and interact with it, because I'm interacting with it, it can no longer stay neutral. It goes either up or down. And what determines it is actually not necessarily or only is the thing permissible. If it's not permissible, then it's locked, and we'll look at that in a second. But if it is permissible, I can still take it and degrade it with a blessing and with a talus and with a kippah and with a shtreimel. It doesn't matter. I can take it and I can degrade it, because if I'm doing it for myself, then holiness is looking at that and saying, yeah, it's kosher, but it thinks it has beingness. It thinks it has identity, right? The Michael who is interacting with this food thinks he's real, doesn't recognize that he's just holiness, doesn't recognize he's just Ein Sof. And so from that perspective, it's going back into the three empirically put. No matter that it had a blessing, no matter that it was kosher, no matter that it was celebrating a holiday, whatever it is. So it's our kavanah, it's our knowledge of the structure of our soul and nefesh elokit and nefesh bamit that is actually the key factor in, does this klipas noga get repaired back to its source, an amazing feat, or does it get shoved back down into the most physical aspects of the world and wait there for me, it'll come back again in this life or another? Yeah?
So that was the answer to the question I was going to ask you, was that we have to balance that understanding that we have all that, but also we have to have bittul. We're not doing it for ourselves.
Yes, but a blessing is not necessarily bittul.
No, but,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that when we know that it's upon us to decide if this is going up or down,
Yeah.
it could be all about your ego, but it's not. I mean, if you have that control, I mean, you really have to understand that it's really,
Yeah, it's constant awareness. This is Jewish mindfulness, right? I could think I'm doing everything right, I'm listening to my rabbi, I'm giving the right amount of charity, I'm celebrating the holidays, etc., etc. But is it all me? Is this a user-friendly relationship? In which case, I'm taking these sparks and I'm still driving them down. There's a distinction in that if you drive down sparks that are permissible, you can still elevate them more easily afterwards. That's the only distinction. But in terms of my interaction, I've taken it and I've done it. I brought it down, no matter if it's completely permissible phenomenon. דהיינו כשהטובה ומעורב בו נתברר מהרע וגובר ועולה ונכלל בקדושה. That is,
That is, it is absorbed within sanctity when the good that is intermingled in it is extracted and separated from the evil prevails over it and ascends to be absorbed in sanctity.
right, so that's what happens when I sit down and I have perfectly mundane meal, say, on a weekday, but I do it out of a sense that I'm not eating because I want to taste good food. I'm not eating because I want to survive even. I'm not eating because I want to accomplish something. I'm eating because I want to help people. I'm eating because I want to be there for my family. I'm eating because I want to teach a bar mitzvah student, right? I'm eating because I want to mentor someone. I'm going to take this energy and I'm going to go out. I'm going to do productive Jewish things, which are all around us here at Temple. And if I eat it with that in mind, that's Nefesh Elokit's garments. Nefesh Elokit is taking that energy, and as we said, it's elevating it through its garments up above the source of our soul to the spark of that food, which is higher than our soul, its source. And it becomes unified with sanctity. And then he gives an example of Rava, a great sage in his time, who, for instance, כגון דרך משל האוכל בישרה שמנה דתורה ושותה יין מבוסם להרחיב דתו לשם ולתורתו.
For instance, if one eats fat beef and drinks spiced wine, not out of physical desire, but in order to broaden his mind for the service of God and his Torah.
Just till there. Right, so the example he gives is food, right? And you'd think, okay, if I'm trying to nullify myself and be humble and have Nefesh Elokit run the show, really I should be eating like a simple meal, not overdoing it, not getting expensive whatever, right? I should be having, it's going to be easier that way. So specifically he picks the most luxurious meal they had at that time, right? And he picks this sage who says, He used to eat choice cuts of beef, like, filet mignon, whatever the best steak is. I don't know if there's a better steak. What's the, prime rib, whatever it is. And really, really fancy wine, beautiful aged. This is the kind of wine you sip and enjoy the bouquet. It's I don't know how much a bottle. He's sitting for this really luxurious meal. You'd think that is nefesh b'amit, right? You think this is all the three impure klipot. He's just taking that food and the sparks in it and pushing them down. But why is he doing it? Right? He's doing it because for him, I don't know if you ever had this experience, when you sit down and eat a rich meat meal, unless you're a vegetarian, but if you do, something about that kind of goes, right? And you drink a glass of really nice wine, and again you go, and your mind broadens. Now, I'm eating it because I like that feeling. I like the relaxed feeling of enjoying a meal and broadening my mind. It tastes so good. Okay, that's me. I'm in there. That's nefesh b'amit. And yes, those sparks are going back down. But what did he eat it for? He wanted to think about Torah, right? He wanted to go deeper into his thoughts. He wanted to teach even more. He wanted to be able to open up his mind to learn about Chochmah V'Tzilus. So even though he was eating a very sumptuous meal, because he was actively nullifying himself and intending to use that energy to learn and to teach, it doesn't matter that the food was the most expensive meal available at the time. He could elevate it, and so can we. Right? So it's not about, in our tradition, not about self-sacrifice. It's not about not enjoying the physical world. We do. It's about why am I enjoying it and who is enjoying it. Which of my souls is really eating that meal. Right? If Nefesh Elokit is eating it, fine. Don't overdo it, but you don't have to avoid wonderful food or wonderful phenomena that are permissible. Enjoy them and elevate them. Right? If it's for me, that's what we're talking about. Spiritually, it doesn't matter if it's kosher or if it's very simple or if I feel like I've gone without and so I'm somehow a very humble being. If it's for me, it's going back down. And that's the trick. That's actually the spiritual dynamic pathway of a Jewish soul that's come down to elevate the world. And he goes on, in fact, to talk about, not in our outline, not in our photocopy, but he goes on to talk about humor, actually, as well. Because Rava also was the most imposing and awe-inspiring sage of his time, and he had such a knowledge of Torah and was such a profound, fiery soul that the greatest minds of the time, his students would come and sit around him and they'd just be in awe. They wouldn't want to say anything, right? I mean, he'd start to teach a class. They'd just be like so timid. They'd be little mice in front of this great soul. So how would he relax them? He'd start off with some jokes, right? A little Mickey Katz, a little Red Skelton. I don't know where he'd pull them from. They didn't have internet, but he probably made them up himself. And he relaxed them. But he wasn't doing it because he wanted them to think he was funny, right? He was doing it, why? To relax them so then he could bring them up to his level closer and teach them. He could bring them closer and again share with them. So even the phenomenon of humor, right, which is speech, which is a garment of either nefesh elokit, nefesh b'amit, I can be telling the same joke in the same context, right? On the one hand, I'd be telling it because I want people to think I'm funny. I want them to like me more. I like the feeling of having people pay attention to me, et cetera, et cetera. And so I tell another and another. And now what's happening? Nefesh b'amit has gotten the microphone. Nefesh b'amit has gotten the speaker, and it's creating garments. And all that energy that I'm using to tell those jokes, that whole phenomenon, again, it's going down into three impure klipot. Is it against Jewish law to tell a joke? No. Right? I mean, some jokes veer into, but a nice, clean, funny joke, there's nothing against Jewish law that says you can't tell a joke. But why am I doing it? Spiritually, it's up or down. Right? So it's not just about the physical world. It's not just about food. It's about materials too. I'm building a house because I want people to think I have a beautiful house and it's me, me, me. I'm building a house so my children can grow up beautifully and become good people and I can host people and share with them. And now I'm taking that lumber and those bricks and I'm elevating my share of the world. It has to do with everything. Let's look at 119. We're skipping ahead. כי לפי שהיה בשר היתר ויין כאשר לכך יכולים לחזור ולעלות עמו בשובו לעבודת השם. So for inasmuch.
For inasmuch as the meat and wine were kosher and permissible, and it was only a person's desire for They have the power to revert and ascend with him when he returns to the service of God, at which time the strength gained from the food and drink are utilized in serving God.
Okay, so now we're moving into, okay, what is the difference between eating my level of kosher with a blessing, etc., but I did it self-centeredly and I moved down, versus I'm going to McDonald's on Yom Kippur and I'm having a bacon cheeseburger because it tastes good. Stam, right? And it goes down. So I got these two sparks that are trapped in the three impure klipot. Is there a difference between the one that was actually within our soul pathway, but I drove it down, and the one that was really what we called three impure klipot to begin with? It didn't have any light that we can process. And there is a difference. The difference has to do with how you get it back out again, right? Okay, the meal that I had with a blessing, etc., that once I go through a certain amount of tshuva, and tshuva is a very complex, atonement is a very complex subject. I'm not going to go deep into now. We could do a whole 6 months on tshuva. There's a whole other book he writes on tshuva and the different pathways of tshuva that's amazing and powerful. But say, whatever it is, tshuva, atonement, can take that spark in this lifetime, even tomorrow, and bring it back up and correct what I did in terms of degrading my share of the world. Unfortunately, when it comes to the bacon cheeseburger or whatever on Yom Kippur, that one's much harder. That one, because it was already klipot to begin with, it's locked into the three impure klipot in a much more rigorous way, and it takes a much, much more refined level of tshuva, of repentance, to actually elevate it, but it can be. In the end, tshuva actually can elevate everything. I mean, sometimes it needs to be very intense and very fine-tuned, but it can. But that's the main difference. The person that created three impure klipot, or drove a spark down in a way that wasn't what we're calling forbidden, which we'll redefine in a moment, it can still be re-elevated with normal tshuva, relatively. But the other side, it becomes locked in, and it's really only a really complete form of tshuva that can get at it. But again, I want to look at the words permitted and forbidden as terrible, terrible translations of these words, because it makes me think that there's this rule book and there's God is looking, it's like, because I said so, you can't do this, right? And then it's just about rules. Really, if you look at the Hebrew words, it says something entirely different that speaks much more to what we're talking about, that there's parts of the world I'm meant to elevate and parts of the world that are not accessible to me to elevate. So let's look at that. Shezehu lishon heter umutar, klamar sheino kashur vasur bidei hachitzonim.
This is implied in the term heter, permissibility, and mutar, permissible. That which may be done or eaten is called mutar, literally meaning released or unbound. In our context, the term means that the permissible object is not chained to the kalipa. That is to say, it is not tied and or bound by the power of the extraneous forces, meaning the kalipa and sitra akara, which are extraneous to the realm of sanctity.
Shelo yuchal lachazor v'alot l'Hashem, preventing it from returning and ascending to God, to oneness, right? Rather, it can turn and ascend when the person involved returns to the service of God, as explained above, when they do tshuva. So look at these words. Permissible, when we say something's allowed, it's not that Dad said, okay, you can do this, so now I can do it. It means, heter and mutar means untied, unchained, released, right? Free to move. And the opposite, asur, forbidden, etymologically is related to being tied down, being chained. Yeah, it doesn't mean forbidden and permitted in terms of when we're talking about halacha, but in our conversation, we're looking at the deeper meaning of the words, the actual root, which means either untied, unchained, or chained down, right? So the world is divided into three categories: that which is holy, and then the other side, some of which is untied and neutral. And as we said, I can encounter it and I can elevate it. Unfortunately, it's untied, I can also move it down, but it's untied from the klipa. It's in the klipa, but it's not necessarily stuck in the klipa. It has a certain amount of light and I can elevate it. I can actually allow it to rise up from the klipa. It's not attached to the klipa. And then you have the lowest category, the 3 impure klipot, which are actually tied down. Right? So you know that pen at the bank, and you want to sign your check, and then you absentmindedly put it in your purse, and you go to walk away, and hold on, I can't get away with this pen. Right? They want to keep this pen here. It's chained to the desk, right? Because they want it to stay there. So same thing with the physical world. When something in our tradition is out of bounds, is not permitted, it's not just because we have rules and we just go crazy and we have to follow them. It's because spiritually, that thing is not going anywhere, right? I can tug and tug and tug, and I can have all the kavana I want, and I could say all the blessings I want, and I could do it with all the positive energy in the world and meditate on it. That stuff is tied to the klipa, and our soul path cannot elevate it, right? It's a kabbalistic fact. So this whole seeming obsession we have with what's permitted and what isn't, it's not so much because we like following rules. Spiritually, it's because we're looking for those things which we can repair, right? I'm wondering if we're looking for the things that are their mind to elevate, and if something is asur, it's tied down. Why waste your energy trying to yank that thing out of the ground? You're not going to be able to do it, right? If I don't have a hammer, don't waste my energy trying to open a coconut. I'm just going to hurt my hand smashing it on it, right? I'm going to waste a lot of time until I go find something that I can open, that I can crack open and get at what's in it. Make sense? So heter and mutter, even the kosher and not permissible, has to do with the spiritual dynamics of the thing in our conversation rather than just the rules. And we should talk a little bit about the idea of tshuva, even though I'm not going to go deep into it. And he looks at that in chapters 7 quite deeply, the different levels of tshuva. And the amazing thing is there's different levels where something that we actually drove down into 3 empirically put, we can elevate. Right? For instance, a very subtle one. If I sit down and I learn some Torah or some Tanya, but I do it absent-mindedly. I do it just because I'm accustomed. You know, on Tuesdays, I sit down and I learn for half an hour. And I didn't do it because I wanted to connect to holiness and I wanted to elevate the world. I wanted to make the place better. I just did it because it's my habit. And I just learned it, closed it, off I went, right? I was thinking about something else. I haven't elevated that. But also, it's not stuck in the klipa either. And the moment I return and learn it again with some kavanah, I actually take that time from the past, much like that subatomic particle that changed its format from wave to particle in the past. I take that past and actually bring it back up into holiness, right? And I elevate it. So that's a simple form, right? No one says it's a sin to sit and learn Torah absent-mindedly, right? Nowhere in the Torah says, thou shalt not absent-mindedly learn Torah. However, it's not gone up when I did that, right? But easy enough, when I go back and learn it again, poof, it goes up. That's like one of the simplest forms, right? Also, if I eat a meal and it's in line with how I'm keeping kosher, and I said it with a blessing and nothing problematic about the meal, but you know what? I was distracted. I was thinking about that I want to go skiing, and so I'm going to eat this so I have energy to go skiing and enjoy skiing. And it was just tastes good. It's about me. I didn't think about how I can help the world. I've taken that food, unfortunately, and I put it in the 3 empirically put. But come Yom Kippur, when I do tshuva for my sins, and I say, I wish I had been more mindful, I wish I had tried to help the world at all times, and I really do tshuva in return, I have the capacity to take those sparks and bring them back up again. Right? That's what tshuva daily and even Yom Kippur is about. But what about the things we did that were truly outside of our soul pathway, right? What about just let me see what time? I don't have my clock here. What time are we at?
1:45.
Good. What about those things we have that truly were a problem, right? Or if I took money and I used it to ruin someone's life viciously, or I stole something and I drove it around for a year, or I took whatever it is you can imagine, right? The worst things we could do. Or even let's look at things that are really, really out of bounds. Like at Temple Israel, we don't serve bacon at events, right? So I walk out of my Yom Kippur service and I break the fast with a piece of bacon, right? Give me a break, right? What are you smiling about? I think we can all agree with that. That's Temple Israel's policy. There's no bacon at temple events, right? So for a Jewish pathway, that is outside, right? You can't elevate that. What about the sparks in that stuff, in that phenomenon, physical or interactive, whatever it is? Everything that exists actually has a divine spark, right? So when we say Klipas Noga has a spark that we can elevate, and the three impure klipot have no light we can elevate, it doesn't mean it doesn't have a spark. It's a spark that I have no power to interact with positively, right? But there are ways of elevating it, and amazingly, the sparks that are in the three impure klipot are from an even higher source than the sparks in Klipas Noga. Right? We said that that vegetable that I ate, its source is higher than my soul, and when I elevate it, it goes above my soul. The same applies to the three impure klipot. They're even lower in category, therefore their source is even higher, because this one rule applies to all of creation. If you imagine a wall of bricks that toppled over, or a wall of stones that toppled over, right? I'm looking at this pile of stones now. I have some stones that are closer to the base of the wall. How high up on the wall were they? Lowest, right? Now I have some stones that are really like scattered far away. How high on the wall were they probably? So the stones that fell the furthest fell from where on the wall? The highest. The stones that fell the least were from where on the wall? Lowest. Same thing with the spiritual moving into the physical. When you see something that's very high category in the physical, holiness, right? It means it really just fell from very low in the spiritual. Its source was just here. You see something that's in Klipas Noga, it's neutral. Okay, that fell further away. That means its source was even higher, amazingly. You see something that's really like, whoa, can't touch that, right? There is energy in there. Nothing exists that doesn't have a purpose. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a spark of godliness because it's here. That's Kabbalah 101, right? But it fell so low, it must have been from an extremely high source. So high and so powerful that I can't even interact with it. That's like nuclear, that's cold fusion, right? I'm going to stick with my electric heater, right? But there is a way that it can be elevated. Two ways, in fact. One is, in our pathway, simply by avoiding it, right? If I'm the kind of person that really, I really like the taste of whatever, and now I have an opportunity to eat it, and I'm really craving it, and I say, you know what? As a Jewish act today, I'm not going to eat it. Now I haven't ate it, but I've actually helped elevate that spark in some way. By resisting it, we can elevate parts of it. Right? That's one way. But the other way is mind-blowing, and that has to do with, again, a level of tshuva. And that is, you can atone so that your past sins become like just errors, just ignorant errors, right? Like accidental, right? So say I'm the kind of person that yells at everybody around me. I just yell, and then I do work for however many years until I realize, yelling is actually against Jewish law, it's harming the world, it's adding to klipa, it's degrading my soul, and I feel so embarrassed that I ever yelled. And I won't do it again. I've changed myself. From my perspective now, those acts were actually uninformed mistakes, right? Then, with all the information I had, I was deciding to yell, I was choosing to yell, I was being that kind of person, I had no problem with it, and then it was a deliberate sin, and I was taking things and putting into klipa in terms of my speech, or scoffing, maybe telling bad stories about people, that you could use that too. Now that I've elevated myself and I realize I can be more productive in the world, I'm not going to do that. Now looking back, I was like, I didn't know what I know now. Actually, it was an error. And so we can actually take those sparks and you can shift them from being negatives to being just accidental, a much more subtle version. But there's an even more radical form of tshuva that the Alter Rebbe describes, and that is when you really get wrapped up in the sense of, wow, holiness is the most amazing thing, right? You get a taste of it. Not just spiritual elevation, by the way. And this is a key point in this, and we'll take a little detour. We sometimes confuse, especially seekers, for whoever is watching online, hi. we sometimes confuse spiritual elevation and holiness, and they are not the same thing, right? Holiness in Judaism means nullified to the Ein Sof. Nullified to the Ein Sof, right? Doesn't mean it's having a spiritually elevated experience, right? When I get up at 3 in the morning and change that baby's diaper so they grow up strong and they're healthy, God knows it's not a spiritual experience. Every parent knows it's not a spiritual experience. It's the last thing you want to do. But you're raising a child that's holy, right? People that stand here all day and help give out food and feed hungry people, maybe some of them are having a spiritual experience, but you're spending your time, you're schlepping stuff, you're talking to people, you're giving stuff out, you're working in an organization, you're running back and forth. You're not necessarily having a spiritual experience. It's a holy experience. Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it happens at the same time. You'll be at a service, you'll close your eyes, you'll say the Shema with a certain intent, and woof, we're somewhere else. We're beyond ourselves, and that's great. And there they come together. But I can have spiritually elevated experiences that are not holy, right? I mean, we've all seen examples. There's ways, whether it's meditation practice or whether it's using substances that elevate a person. You can have highly spiritually elevated experiences, but it's just about me, right? Yeah, I'm getting a spiritual perspective, but what am I doing with that? Am I pleasing myself? Am I spending 40 days in a retreat and ignoring people in my life? Am I puffing myself up so that I think I'm such a spiritual person? They don't necessarily go hand in hand, right? And I'm sure your imagination could go to more graphic and obvious places. But in Judaism, holiness means nullified to the Ein Sof. And that could be sitting and learning something really boring for another 10 minutes and just pushing yourself through it and having a non-spiritual experience, but doing it because you want to understand godliness. Or it could mean the most elevated prayer that you could have on Ne'ilah here at Temple Israel. It might be very spiritual elevated, but holiness means nullified to the Ein Sof, and it could be a very mundane reality. And that's why so much of holiness in Judaism is about our eating and our drinking and how we speak and how we use our money and how we use the physical world, because we recognize holiness reaches all the way up and down, and sometimes it's spiritually elevated, sometimes it's not. Whereas many seekers think the more spiritually elevated an experience is, the closer I am to God, the more holiness is in it. Not necessarily, not at all. God's hidden everywhere, in the spiritual and the physical. And holiness has the same definition, whether it's spiritual or physical. I can be, in the age of Aquarius and having a very spiritual experience, but it's not necessarily about helping the people around me. Maybe about my own pleasure. So now this level of tshuva, I've taken things that are in the 3 impure klipot, and I'm so excited about holiness that now I just look back at my life and I say, how could I have yelled at all these people? How could I have just eaten all these carrots and driven them down into the klipot? They came to me, trusting me. They're like, Michael, I'm your carrot. Just think something good and eat me with a blessing. And I'm like, no, boss wants more carrots, right? And I took those carrot sparks and I drove them down into the klipot or other foods. And I'm looking back and I'm saying, oh, I want to live in a better way. Oh my gosh, now that I see what it was like to live just for myself and have Nefesh B'Mit running the show and Nefesh Elokit is imprisoned here in my consciousness, now I really have a thirst for it that's so fiery that it's changing how I do everything. And I'm approaching this with more passion and with more joy and with more commitment. And that passion, joy, and commitment would not have been in my consciousness had I not been the opposite kind of person for so many years beforehand. Right? So as strange as it is, all that counterproductive activity, all that klipa that all the sparks I drove down into the impure klipot, they are now causing me to carry out the productive side of the universe with even more joy and with even more fire and raising me to greater heights. And I never would have gotten there. Those were the fuel for me to get to that height. Yeah? Of nullification, right? It's not me at a height, it's me being nullified, so it's a greater height. So because I return with that kind of power, actually everything that I did, all the sparks that I drove into the impure klipot, they become not just neutral again, they become actual mitzvahs. They're elevated back to their source. Now remember our conversation, right? Which are more powerful higher sparks? My kosher steak and my normal jokey conversation, or my bacon cheeseburger and my lashon hara, my telling a bad story about somebody. Which one actually has a spark from a higher source in my wall? Which fell further, and which has a higher spark? Right. So all those sparks that I went and I collected, not on purpose, unknowingly, and drove down to the klipa, I took the most powerful sparks, more powerful than even are within our permissible tradition. I drove them down, and then I brought them back up to even greater heights, and I was working with energy that was even more powerful than what I had been working with had I just been raised with this tradition and been mindful my whole life. So amazingly, when we look at the world around us, if we see phenomena that seem counterproductive or that seem problematic, there's two ways we can look at them. We can say, oh, this person doesn't understand, and toy, 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 and really they should know better. But a tzaddik was going to look at this person and say, whoa, look at the luminescence of those sparks that are getting ready to be raised back up. Look how powerful energy system this person is working with. Look what the universe has trusted them to raise, sparks that I can never get at. Now, are they backing up it? No. But if I look at the world with certain faith, they're going to be, right? Everything's going to be raised back up. Everybody's going to get to their highest potential, right? So that's where my bitachon comes in, my emunah. I can look at the world with judgment. Oh, look at these people. Someone has to teach them properly. Or I can look at the world with emunah and bitachon, trust and faith. Say, you know what? Everything's happening exactly the way it's supposed to. Everything's going to go to a good conclusion. Everybody is on their own pathway, which I have no idea where they're at, and they're all moving upwards in their own direction. And some of them are really taking a big swing down because they really want to go even higher than I can get. Right? So that's amazing. And in fact, the whole world can be like that. Right? So it's either sparks that are already redeemed or even greater sparks that are on their way to being redeemed. And then finally, the Alter Rebbe gets into really esoteric stuff about after a life. Say I've lived a life and I haven't risen to the level of Beinoni or Tzaddik, and I have some residue. There's certain cleansing things that happen afterwards. We confuse them with hell in other traditions. For us, we don't confuse that at all. We know it's just a wash-dry cycle for our soul, because being in earth, you kind of wind up taking some of that residue with you. So there's a purification process that happens after a person is not in a body anymore that allows the soul to be a soul in heaven again and to kind of purify itself of any residue from the earth. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of the information section. So God willing, when we meet again, we'll start looking at how we apply this new vantage point of our soul.
Thank you.
Yeshar koach.
Thank you.